Everyone's a critic. This quote remains true, especially in the age of the internet. Anyone can give their opinion and take on something they enjoy or dislike, and the whole world can see it. Now, whether that opinion is worth listening to is entirely up to the beholder. Some people usually agree with the opinions they hold, or they just like the personality and charisma the critics have. There are dozens of critics online to watch, and all each have their own way they review, be it movies, games, or sometimes both. This leads us to who we're talking about today. This is Bob Chipman, also known as Moviebob. Moviebob is an internet critic who started all the way back in 2008, and was one of the few online internet critics to gain a following, not counting a certain other critic. Moviebob got noticed during this time, and even managed to get noticed by a few groups and websites because of his talent, and then got kicked by website after website due to an unhealthy addiction to a certain Bluebird app and his own ideologies. Moviebob went from a hardcore Nintendo and movie fan to someone who had his brain melted by politics. And we're going to talk about how this happened today. This is the story of Moviebob.
Mario Brothers 3!
Now, usually a video like this will go into the subject in questions, early life, their upbringing, how they came to be an e-celeb, but we're gonna save that for later, and you'll see why. All you need to know for the time being is, a mid-20s Bob Chipman saw what the likes of James Rolfe and Yahtzee were doing in the gaming scene on the internet, liked what he saw, and wanted to put his own spin on it. So, on February 2nd, 2008, the first game overthinker was introduced to the world.
I thought about starting this off with some sort of introduction, but honestly, you don't care. Many thanks if you were pretending to care anyway, but we both know you don't. Your first question is not who is this guy, but rather what sets this guy apart from every other fucking game culture video rant guy on the web, and rightly so. When Sony's PlayStation broadened the gamer audience outside the traditional parameters of devoted nerddom, it brought in new audiences that found gaming's traditional design schematics, culled as they were from the same lovely brew of comic books, Dungeons & Dragons, Star Trek, Doctor Who, anime, and what have you like the rest of Atari generation nerddom, to be not entirely conducive to their personal vision of what was visually and tonally appealing.
Yeah, it's definitely a product of its time, the fast-talking, wisecracking clearly taken from the likes of Yahtzee. The very first episode is about No More Heroes and how unique it was among the sea of generic gritty games that were coming out around the time. And yeah, that's basically how things were in the late 2000s, so he kinda hit the mark with that one. This is actually kinda fun and nostalgic. But the only thing about it is, the warning signs for what Bob would eventually become were here from the very start, including his fanatical fanboyism for Nintendo.
This guy is still the gold standard, this guy is still God, this will be the greatest thing to happen to gaming since the invention of jiggle physics.
He would also put out his very first movie review around the same time about the Sex and the City movie. And yep, the same warning signs were there as well.
In what can only be described as a metatextually rich conceit of oddball casting, the four gay men in question are in fact portrayed on screen by three women, and one high-tech plasticine alloy-skinned cyborg built to resemble actress Kim Cattrall circa 1986. Coincidentally, has anyone seen the real Kim Cattrall lately? And if so, how's she looking?
He would put out a couple of more videos, covering stuff like the damsel in distress trope in games, reviewing more movies, and started getting a modest following for people who found the topics he was covering interesting. But you can tell in some of the videos, he was pitching his voice out to make it look like he was fast-talking like Yahtzee, which I found completely unnecessary.
I mean, the Super Mario Brothers are working-class Italian plumbers from Brooklyn. That's pretty fucking American, and they represent certain quintessentially American traits like how courage and hard work can allow two ordinary guys to save an entire world.
I already discovered the AVGN when I was like 10 when these videos were coming out, so that was enough for me. But if I found Bob's videos around the time, I would have probably watched them. The style is very of the time that I would have liked. And yeah, Bob does let his political views slip in from time to time, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. But what really surprised me is how level-headed he is about it, at least in the early episodes. He's really calm and collected about them.
Look, even if you didn't vote for the guy or don't like his politics, just his existence is one of those things that speaks really positively of how far along we've come in some respects.
This is actually really surprising how tame he is about his views here. He knows the audience's enjoyment comes before anything. I can totally see why he grew a following back then. Eventually, Bob would start getting noticed by big publications. Well, big at the time, including Escapist Magazine and Screw Attack, and even managed to win a contest for the latter, having the best videos in that particular competition. And this, right here, shined a big light on everything. From his old blog posts, Bob seems happy. Yeah, he's very happy about making it big and getting noticed. It is almost a polar opposite to the Moviebob we know today. It's actually kind of sad looking at these old blogs, where Bob seems like he is genuinely excited and happy about making it somewhere in the world. Bob would eventually get picked up by the Escapists and Screw Attack to do shows for them, so he finally broke into the big boy scene, along the likes of Yahtzee and James Rolfe. And the game Overthinker itself got a huge budget increase. Instead of just talking over pictures, he started having live action segments and very Linkara-style live-action overarching plots.
Why have you not yet destroyed the Overthinker?
You don't need to worry about that, Chief. Yeah, I zapped him the Wario's woods.
This is very style of the time, like I said. This hit all the stereotypes back in the day. He even had the dark persona of himself called the Anti-Thinker he had to fight. Oh man, these special effects are on par with Uganda films, and I'm pretty sure he had 10 times the budget of those. This was the cool thing to do. But the thing is, Bob, he's very clearly having fun with this. And that's the thing about it. He's having fun with this, and probably getting his exercise for the month while doing it. This would continue on for a while, introducing characters like the Pyro Thinker and the Cryo Thinker. Oh dear Christ. Where's the Snee Thinker, Bob? So, as the show went on, his audience and social status would grow, and alongside it, his ego. We're about to move on to our next chapter, but before we do that, I'm going to take you back to one of his oldest blog posts. When advertising his 5th episode of the Game Overthinker, he says this in an old blog post. I've been hesitant to jump into politics too early. This is meant to be about the culture surrounding a hobby, not a political machine. And if you get into politics before establishing a broader identity, you risk getting pigeonholed as a liberal commentator or right-wing game rant guy, which can turn off a lot of people unnecessarily. Oh my God, if he only knew. If Happy Early Days Moviebob only knew what he would become. Having seen an example of some of Bob's videos and their epic lore, when you watch them, do you ever think to yourself, God, I want to hear this man's political opinions and how to fix this country? Well, if you did, I simply have to ask.
What's wrong with you?
Also, before we continue, this is not the part where I expose which side of petty online wars I'm on. Sorry folks, I shoved this fence post up my ass and I'm staying on it. Feels nice. As Bob gained more and more fame and recognition, he started realizing he had a voice that people actually listened to, and as time went on, he started slowly pulling cues from his own personal politics and putting them in his videos. There were signs of this already sprinkled in, as we've seen earlier, but now they were becoming flat-out blatant. For those not aware, Bob is a self-proclaimed libertarian and is very much on the left side of things. He's very feminist, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, in theory. But Bob is a special case. Bob holds very, very strange views and values that make everyone on every side of the political spectrum scratch their heads. We'll get to those at some point, but right now we're going to focus on a very important point in Bob's story. In 2014, a major event in the gaming scene happened, a little movement called Goobergate. Now, I want to admit something right here, right now. I have no clue what this movement was about. I mean, I knew about it. I got the basic details of it. Something to do with feminism and women in gaming and all that. But that's about all I got. Some people got sent death threats, some bad things happened in it, but that's all I can tell you. To this day, I cannot tell you what my stance on this is because I have no clue what to take a stance on. The main thing that confused me was the fact this movement didn't really seem to have a goal. I mean, all it was journalists and gamers flinging shit at each other for 2 or 3 years straight, and then it all just sort of stopped. I don't think women were going to make gaming journalism better or worse in any way, because that was already in the dumpster at that point. Sorry ladies, you can't fix what is already broken. It's next to impossible to find a neutral standpoint on it. Even the Wikipedia article is extremely opinionated, and pretty obvious there were some edit words on this page alone. I don't think I've ever read a Wikipedia article that sounded so angry. But my stance on it is completely irrelevant. What matters here is Bob's stance, and when we talk about women in gaming, he sees the women part, and he's in. This would mark a sudden shift in Bob's content, which were very heavily opinionated on the topic of Gamergate and feminism. He was 100% on the side of women in gaming, which he has the full right to be if it weren't for the fact that he was now pissing on his own audience he'd built up over the course of 6 years. People who had watched him for years for his insight and takes on things, definitely not for his arcs and skits, were now being belittled by him and told they're toxic and need to change. There were definitely some bad apples during Goobergate, but instead of focusing solely on the bad apples, it was everyone who identified as a gamer.
I didn't start Gamergate or any of the other stupid outbursts that came before it. All I've ever tried to do is fight that mindset.
No, you didn't create it. You only trained it and armed it. And so they've turned your secondhand rifles on feminism, on minority voices, on independent developers, on socially conscious game journalists, innocent people who've committed no crime save for trying to elevate this medium and the discussion, all of which might have been averted had you and yours not chosen to also stop building after you'd stopped fighting.
Bob was balls deep in this movement, which must have sucked for him because that was the only thing he was ever balls deep in. It was even the topic for his series finale of the original run of the Game Overthinker, so that's how the OG series ended. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. He talked about it so much, he was eventually let go from Screw Attack, who tried remaining neutral, but Bob wasn't having any of it, so he got kicked. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This is what started the transformation into the Moviebob we know today. The heavy political, no fun, no entertainment Moviebob who brings up his personal values and politics every chance he gets. If the movie or game has anything vaguely political or feminist in it, you can bet your ass he's gonna bring up his views and crap on the people who disagree with him.
In fact, if Joker does have a coherent thematic or moral arc to call its own, it doesn't, but if it did, it would boil down to Fleck's journey of self-actualization through realizing that while society can be tough, the real cause of all of your problems is probably a woman.
This also includes Ghostbusters 2016 and that whole debacle. You can take a wild guess what his views on that movie were.
And almost a year's worth of internet man-babies crying about gender-flip casting that the movie itself doesn't even make any kind of big deal out of, the Ghostbusters remake is actually pretty goddamn decent. Bottom line, 3 out of 4 stars, good but no classic, and seriously for a minute, if you really are one of these guys who's bent out of shape because they cast chicks in this one, please, for the love of Gozer, grow the fuck up.
So this is now the status quo for Moviebob. Very politically and feminist driven, and maybe some people prefer this style, but only because they agree with it instead of actually being higher quality. His older fans were left in the dust, and a lot moved on. Speaking of moving on, after getting kicked from his old jobs, Bob would move all of his content to YouTube, and would then spend all his free time on a certain social media website everyone is familiar with. After his makeover into the Bob we know today, Bob would get into arguments with people all the time. Most of his arguments would take place on our favorite website, Twitter. I'm not calling it X. Bob has a crippling Twitter addiction. He has, since 2011, made over 308,000 posts. Most of that is retweeting things that align with his ideals or arguing with conservatives and right-wingers. Oh yeah, this is where Bob would express his undying hatred for the right. The 2016 election of Donald Duck absolutely broke Bob. I know a lot of people don't like Trump. I know a lot of people watching right now don't like him. That is perfectly fine. But I want you to take your hatred for Trump, multiply it by 100, and it is still only a fraction of how much Moviebob despises him. He is the anti-Trump. If Trump likes something, Bob hates it. If Trump hates something, Bob loves it. If Trump had an internet review show in the early 2010s, he would have to fight Moviebob as his alter ego at some point. His absolute hatred for Trump and his political opponents is monumental. He legit wishes for the eradication of them, and has flat out admitted he enjoys any scenes of movies that involve people under the umbrella getting brutally murdered and tortured in his reviews.
There is literally nothing going on beyond, hey, here's a whole mess of people the filmmakers and presumably most of their audience imagine it'd be satisfying to watch a brutally beaten to death being brutally beaten to death. Please enjoy. Yeah, I happen to be more or less on the same page with the movie. It was really, really, really satisfying to watch 50 or so get their skulls caved in for about 4 minutes.
He advocates for eugenics if it means wiping out people who don't agree with him. This is just flat-out psychotic behavior. This man has had his brain absolutely decimated by politics. This sounds legitimately unstable. This man is willing to go with any tactic if it means wiping out people who don't see eye to eye with him. And it's not just me with this fence post up my ass, is it? Does this sound sane to anyone under the same political umbrella with Bob? His perfect utopia is a world where only intelligence and knowledge matter, and not physical strength or labor. He says, while saying a McDonald's meal that could feed 3 or 4 people is a fairly small amount of McDonald's for an average-sized person, and marinates chicken in Mountain Dew. And the rocket's red glare! Also, can't forget about his unquenchable thirst for the ladies. Yes, that's something I've alluded to, but Bob wants a lady friend badly. Bob is 100% the type of person who would use his opinions to get some. I don't think, after all these years, he has succeeded at that in any way. Probably his biggest screw-up was with Lindsay Ellis, where he responded to a random tweet of hers saying they were friends, and Lindsay's response? Completely telling him off, calling him a creep and to stop following her. Bob did not take the response well. And now, it's time to play everyone's favorite quiz show, and you at home can play along too. Moviebob or Nazi? This is the game show where you, yes you, decide if a quote is from Moviebob or an actual self-proclaimed Nazi. Seems simple enough, so let's get right to it. Question 1. There are no bad tactics, only bad targets. Now, who said this quote? If you said Moviebob, you are absolutely correct. Next question. America should confiscate the wealth of millionaire traders. We're not going to allow it to be used to erode the rights for our fellow Americans anymore. Now, who said this? If you guessed Moviebob, you are wrong. Sorry, a Neo said this one. But don't worry, you can make up in the next round. Who said this quote? At a certain point, you had to become comfortable with the idea that a huge swaths of people are so and that they barely qualify as human. Now, who said this? Go on, guess. If you said Moviebob, you are absolutely correct. We have one more question for you today, and this is the one that will win them all. Who said this quote? Stop treating these like people. Are not redeemable and are not worth redeeming in the first place. They're the justly forgotten remnants of an inferior world that we have evolved beyond and escaped. Now, who said this? Go on, this is it. If you said Moviebob, you are correct! Congratulations! You win! This game may be over, but you can play this game yourself. Just check the link in the description below to play it. And your reward for winning this game is watching the rest of this video! So this is what Bob has become. This is what he is now, and is still like to this day. We went from a guy with some interesting topics and insight, a guy who was clearly having fun with his videos and skits, to this. A man who wishes death upon anyone who disagrees with him, a man who seems to have all the soul and passion sucked from his body. There is no fun anymore, there is no enjoyment anymore. Bob from the old days, telling his audience it's just a hobby, is gone. But you know what? I'm not gonna take that. I'm going to have fun with this, damn it, even if we have to go back in time. Back before Goobergate and Twitter melted this man's brain. Back when there was actually something there. We have to go back to what Bob once was. Bob Chipman is a Nintendo fanboy, and that's putting it lightly. Bob Chipman worships Nintendo. You remember that little snippet from his first Game Over Thinker video?
This guy is still the gold standard. This guy is still God. This will be the greatest thing to happen to gaming since the invention of jiggle physics.
Turns out that wasn't a joke. I think he actually believes that. Bob has a fanatical obsession with Nintendo and Mario. It's flat out unhealthy. If you thought the whole wishing death upon Rotwingers was crazy, you ain't seen nothing yet. Some of you may recall a few months ago I did a video on the speedrunner Chibi, and late in the video I covered the mock funeral he did, and I actually got a lot of shit from people for the way I handled that, saying I was just picking on him for something he's passionate about, and I was hamming it up for laughs, alright? I will fully admit to that.
I'll sing a song from Earthbound.
Wait, you're gonna what? The whole thing was just very awkward, and the singing didn't help, but it really wasn't that bad as I was making it out to be. The Janny's banning everyone in chat is still cringe, though. Well, believe it or not, Bob manages to surpass this in terms of absurdity. Yes, Bob held his own Nintendo-themed funeral, but not for Iwata. Oh no, he held a funeral, or a full 12-minute moment of silence for... He has a moment of silence, not for a person, but a magazine made to shill you games. This is why he's the template for that 38-year-old consumer meme. And on that note, shortly before Gamergate took over every cortex in Bob's brain, he released a book dedicated to his love for Nintendo, and more specifically, Super Mario Bros. 3. It was called Brick by Brick. And yes, I read it. And I don't think I can unread it. So from start to finish, I'm going to go through what each chapter entails. This damn thing is 200 pages long, so I don't think you want to know every little detail. So, Chapter 1 of Brick by Brick it's legit just a history of Nintendo up to 2013 when the book released, with some blatant corporate worship and the kissing of Miyamoto's feet. Nothing interesting. Chapter 2 is all about Bob's childhood and his conversion into the religion that is known as Nintendo. How he was first introduced at a friend's house and wanted an NES of his own. He even fantasized about the game and drew pictures of it when he didn't own it, and when he finally got it, he became a fanatic. He was picked on a lot by other kids because of it, and he had been seeing a child therapist who offered him different types of medication, which his parents rejected.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
He eventually gets to the reveal of Super Mario Bros. 3, you know, the topic of the book after all. The game's big reveal was in the movie The Wizard, which was just a huge advertisement for Nintendo, and he legit just watched this movie just for that. So it did its job. Good job participating in society, young Bob. He likens the reveal of Mario Bros. 3 to the JFK assassination and 9/11 of their respective generations. Yes, he is now comparing national tragedies to Mario. If that wasn't enough, a few pages later, he compares getting dragged into the 90s console war as his own personal Vietnam. You know, not downplaying the impact of those who fought in Nam at all. If this man is comparing him playing video games to actual events in history that affected hundreds of thousands, is it any wonder why his political views aren't taken seriously in the slightest? Skipping ahead a bit more, he got to play Mario World 2 Yoshi's On to completion, and found out, in the ending, that the brothers were being delivered to the Mushroom Kingdom instead of Brooklyn, so a bit of a continuity error in the series, since they were supposed to be from Brooklyn. But that really got to Bob. Yes, little things like that were enough to bother him. He was that obsessed. Going into the N64 and GameCube, Bob got older and got a job at Blockbuster, moving away from games for a bit so he could start focusing on school and his interest in films. He started his old blog where he reviewed movies, and it was basically the prototype Moviebob. Around the 7th generation, he got back into games with the Wii and its motion controls, and the retro gaming boom that was going around, and also started watching videos from the Angry Video Game Nerd and the such, and so he started his Game Over Thinker series, and you know the rest of the story from here. That's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 and 4 are, well, how do I put this? The two chapters here, basically, are a walkthrough of Super Mario Bros. 3. These 2 chapters detail every mechanic about the game, from the power-ups to the enemies, bosses, and level design, and once in a while, Bob will sprinkle in a few of his inner thoughts and things he did that day while he was playing through it for this book. There is not really much to comment on here. If you want a taste of what these 2 chapters entail, just pull up a guide on Mario Bros. 3 on GameFAQs. There is one thing these chapters have, though, and that's during his monologues. He goes on about his grandmother, whose health was in dire straits. She would go in and out of treatment until finally she passes away. Bob doesn't like funerals. Social situations like that scare him. So after they put her to rest and the family meets up to grieve, he runs off to buy an air conditioner. Yeah, he put an air conditioner before family. And that's how the book ends. His grandma dies, he beats Bowser in Mario Bros. 3, and gives a 1-page epilogue, and that's it. That was a complete waste of time. The critics on this book were not very kind to it. Bob scrubbed most traces of it off the web, and honestly, it's not even worth a pity read. Most of it is just a walkthrough of Mario 3. Unless you worship the ground Nintendo walks like Bob, there's nothing for you here. Oh, and did I forget to mention Bob has multiple books? No, I'm not reading any of them. This was enough. Don't quit your day job, Bob. After all that, we stand here today. Bob is still online, he still posts about politics all the time on Twitter, and he still makes video reviews. Thing is, when I watch his videos from recent times, they feel so lifeless. I don't get that there's any passion here anymore. I feel like he's just doing it for the sake of doing it now. He just looks old and worn out. Gone are the days of an energetic, passionate Bob doing skits that, while they are very cringe, they clearly had a lot of fun making them. There is no fun here anymore. I understand people get older, their worldview changes, and they like to talk about things they find important to them. But the medium of games and movies is meant to be fun. It's meant to entertain. That is their purpose.
If it's not fun, why bother?
I've said a lot about Bob today. I mean a lot about Bob. All the wishes of death upon people, all the talking down and crapping on his own audience, that's pretty heinous. But in the nicest way I can possibly say this, Bob, you need to lighten up. Nobody likes a doom and gloomer, and if you keep doing this crap, nobody will take you seriously, ever. It's never too late to clean up your image. This was the story of a man who just took inspiration from the people he watched, did his own version of it, and then had his mind melted by politics and Nintendo. What a rabbit hole to fall down. You should have taken your own advice, Bob. God bless, and like and subscribe. Go enjoy your hobbies in peace.
Buy my book! 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 Buy my book!